here today. This means a great deal to me to not only receive the endorsement, which of course is incredibly impactful, but also to start the process of being your partner as we build on the progress that has been made against pretty steep odds and keep going here at home and around the world. And so to that end, I want to thank LCV. I want to thank Jean, one of the most effective, relentless advocates for the environment against climate change. I'm so grateful to you for everything that you have done and will do. I want to thank Congresswoman Custer for being here. Thank you very much. And also Senator Betty Lasky and former Senator Sylvia Larson, great advocates. And I thought former Congressman Dick Swett was here. I don't see him right now, but I'm grateful for his strong support. I want to thank Alice Chamberlain, who started off the program today, someone else I have been really privileged to know for a very long time, and who has been a great advocate here in New Hampshire and around the country. So thank you, Alice. And then finally, Carol Browner, I am so pleased that she chairs the board of LCV, because nobody comes better prepared to try to converge policy and politics, because we can care all we want about the policies that we know should be undertaken, but then we have to figure out how do we get the politics lined up and get the results that we're seeking. There is no doubt in my mind that the issues wrapped up in the challenge of climate change are ones that will have great consequences. That's why I say it's consequential, because the consequences from what is happening here at home and around the world cannot be escaped. It's not like there's some place you can go and hide from it. It is global and local. And the old days, when we used to talk about the environment, we would try to combine those two. Remember, Jean? Think globally, act locally. Now we've got to think globally and locally and act globally and locally, because there is no alternative. And having this endorsement means so much to me personally, because I believe strongly that we can make the case, we can convert some of the skeptics, but it will only happen if we are going to be stalwart in our focus on this issue as being central, not only to this campaign, but for everything we do politically going forward. Now, we're here, and this is like preaching to the choir, because we know that climate change is not only real, but is already present. 2015 is on track to be the hottest year on record by quite a bit. In just the last month, we've seen record high tides, sunny day floods in Miami, catastrophic flash flooding in Texas, wildfires raging across the West. The future that scientists have warned us about has arrived. We have been fighting this battle for a long time, and I know that for those of you who've been on the front lines, it can feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back is what happens. For instance, in 2008, think about this, in 2008, hardly ancient history, the Republican Party platform had a long section about combating climate change. It supported wind and solar renewable energy. And now we have candidates like Ted Cruz, who says climate change is not science. Now that can be pretty dispiriting, but it also can be galvanizing, because that means there are Republicans, quite a few of them, because remember, the Republican Party was among the original conservationists and environmentalists. We owe the EPA to a Republican president. I am issuing a very wide call for Republicans who care about this issue to join with us, because this is not a partisan issue. This should not be locked in by any one party or the other. And I really applaud the president, because we've had a few good weeks for the climate. And LCV had a lot to do with producing those good weeks. First, President Obama canceled future lease sales in the Arctic, and I could not agree more. As president, I will put the Arctic off limits to drilling, because I think there are some places where we have to keep fossil fuels in the ground or under the ocean. I will also work as president to create a coalition of other nations, particularly those whose territory borders the Arctic, to join us in this effort, because we're going to need to get the Arctic Council members. I was very active in this arena when I was Secretary of State, because there are a lot of countries eyeing the Arctic for exploitation, and we need to have an international consensus similar to what years ago we had about the Antarctic, only it has to be updated like we have to do with the Antarctic, and we have to get more countries to agree with us, leave it under the ocean. Now, secondly, I'm so proud of New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, because he announced he's going to investigate Exxon to get to the bottom of whether they misled their shareholders. This is something that all three of the Democratic candidates called for. It's a big deal. It is unacceptable for anyone to put the health of our families and our planet at risk by obscuring science. Science, by the way, that they themselves initiated. And then as time went by, they rejected. So whether you're in the boardroom or on the campaign trail, we need to hold you accountable. And I am thrilled that the New York Attorney General is starting that process. And then, of course, on Friday, President Obama rejected the Keystone XL pipeline. So North America's dirtiest fuel will not be making its way through the heartland and adding to the climate challenge. So it's been a good few weeks, but we have a lot more to do. And I am so concerned that we have to do a better job reaching out to people who either don't yet see this as an important priority, or who do but are not quite sure how to address it. It's kind of what Carol has said, that there are even people who basically agree with us, but they're worried about the solutions. And I have been very clear that combating climate change is not only the right thing to do in order to preserve our planet, to deal with the threats that it poses, but it can be a very smart economic approach as well. Why? Because in addition to defending President Obama's historic gains that he's made, starting with the Clean Power Plan, but others as well, we need a clear economic program that goes hand in hand with combating climate change. So here's what I am doing. I want to set some big goals for America again. I think we need to get back into the future business and set those goals, like President Kennedy sending a man to the moon and back in the decade. When he announced it, people thought, we're never going to do that. That seems kind of far-fetched. Well, we did it. So I believe we can have 500 million more solar panels installed by the end of my first term, and enough renewable electricity to power every home in America within 10 years. I will also... Building on the Clean Power Plan, I will launch a clean energy challenge to partner with states, cities, and rural America to accelerate clean energy deployment, building efficiency, and clean transportation. I spend a lot of time when I'm not in New Hampshire, I'm often in Iowa, and I have been struck by how 1/3 of the electricity in Iowa already comes from wind. So when people say to me, well, it's really hard, we don't know how to do it. No, there are places all over America who are using wind and solar, who have plans in response to the Clean Power Plan, who are proceeding. We just have to take this look at it from a national perspective and really engage everyone to understand it can be an economic winner, not loser. It will create millions of new jobs and businesses. I will also launch negotiations with Canada and Mexico for a North American climate compact to cut carbon pollution and fight climate change across the continent. I think it's important that we work with our partners to the north and to the south, that we do more on a modern grid that connects both Canada and Mexico to us and then heads south through Central America into Latin America. And where we work together instead of arguing over a pipeline, where we work together to move more quickly on clean, renewable energy. I want to make sure every American shares in the benefits of a clean energy future. So that means helping to bring solar and energy efficiency technologies to more low-income communities. I think this is something we don't talk about enough. When Carol was talking about the health consequences that she and I worked on back in the 90s, we had a great partner in Barbara Boxer. Yes. We really tried to raise the alarm about what pollution does to people's lungs, particularly children. But now we've kind of lost the importance of that. People think, well, things are getting better. An African-American child is still 500% more likely to die of asthma than a white child, because they often live near power plants and other polluters, and they unfortunately bear the consequences. So environmental justice shouldn't just be a slogan, it should be a goal. And we have to do more to bring clean, renewable energy to low-income communities. I also want to say a special word about coal. We have to move away from coal. Everybody understands that. There's no doubt about it. But that does not and should not mean we move away from coal miners, their families, and their communities. They kept the lights on. They put the lights on back in the 19th century. I'm not going to leave them behind. We need to figure out how we're going to have a special transition program for coal miners and their communities. Protecting mine workers' pensions and health benefits, for example, is essential, because as coal has plateaued, a lot of the companies have literally tried to snatch away the benefits that coal miners have earned over time. And we need to create new economic opportunities in coal communities. So yes, we're going to move toward clean, renewable energy as fast as we can move, but we are going to try to remember and support the people who turned on the lights for much more than a century and not leave them behind at all. In the weeks ahead, I'll be announcing more plans to make our cars, our buildings, our industries more efficient, to save Americans more money on your electric bills, and to make our manufacturing more competitive. I'm also looking with great anticipation toward the meeting in Paris in December, where I know from the work that is going on, there is a very high hope and expectation that there can be a new, ambitious, lasting international climate agreement to be accepted. And if it is successful, which I hope and believe it will be built on the foundation that President Obama and I laid in Copenhagen. I appreciate Carol mentioning it, because it was a great example of how important it is to stay focused and stay relentless in dealing with these big problems. So when we got to Copenhagen, I went ahead of the president, frankly, to determine whether it was worth the president coming, because nobody was sure what would happen. There were big splits between the developed economies, the developing economies. The developing economies basically wanted a, Kyoto 2.0, where they would take none of the responsibility, they would have none of the accountability. That would primarily rest with the developed economies. And there was no recognition of how the future would be one dominated by Chinese emissions, Indian emissions, other developing countries. So the president and I were I told him to come. I said, it's very contentious, it's very difficult, as Carol remembers, but come and let's see if we can get something accomplished. So he came and we couldn't find the Chinese. I mean, we kept calling. I mean, after all, it's the President and Secretary of State saying, we'd love to meet with you. Oh, so sorry. On the way to the airport. Oh, so sorry. Can't find. I mean, it was just quite remarkable. So we sent out scouts to go through this huge convention center in Copenhagen and said, find the Chinese. And they did. And they reported back to us. They said they're in a secret meeting with the Indians, the South Africans, and the Brazilians. I looked at the president looked at me, and we said, that sounds like a meeting we need to attend. So you've heard of motorcades. Well, this was a footcade. We marched through that convention center, and we went up these stairs. I mean, they were way out in the far corner, and they were meeting in a room. They covered it all up with, drapes like that. And that had Chinese security at the top of the stairs, and the president and I are going, his legs are a lot longer than mine, so, we're running up the stairs, he's walking up the stairs. We get to the top of the stairs, and the Chinese are pointing in the absolute opposite direction, like, no, there, and our advanced person's going, no, there. So we go right at the top of the stairs, and there is the room, and the Chinese security guys have their arms out, they're trying to prevent us from getting in. And so, the president's tall, he pushes through, and then their arms go back up, and I'm thinking, okay, really? So I go under, and we get into the room, and the president says, we've been looking for you. And so we pull up chairs. We did have our translator with us, and a big argument started back and forth, I'm like, what were we doing there? But we just basically said, look, guys, this is about your future. You can leapfrog. You can make different decisions. You can keep developing, but doing it with clean, renewable energy, and we want you to be part of what the world needs to do. And it was at that meeting that they did. The Chinese agreed to begin to take a hard look at themselves. So as president, I will build on what we get done in Paris and keep pushing it. It will always be a high priority of mine. Because after all, I think we have to use every tool we have. There is no planet B. This is it. And my pledge to you, and certainly my great hope, is that we will be partners from day one. We will be ready on we can go to the inauguration, but literally on day one, we will start being ready, because the work will have to be done ahead of time. I've already told Jean and Carol that, to start renewing the executive actions that need to be renewed, looking at the legislation that needs to be introduced, setting up whatever the follow-up to Paris is. This will be a huge part of what I try to do in my very first weeks in office. And I am so grateful that you will be there with me. Thank you all very much.
It is wonderful to see all of you. I see some familiar faces. I see some people who I haven't seen before. So just a little refresher.